I want to welcome you all to the Blue Policy Roundtable, which we find is a very important subject if we're going to move forward with the blue economy. But first, I want to introduce Toby Stapleton, who is the CEO and founder of the Blue Venture Forum in Rhode Island, to talk about what is happening down there.
This is going to work. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be brief. I'm Toby Stapleton. I'm the director of the Blue Venture Forum. We're a nonprofit organization based in Newport, Rhode Island, that's trying to bring more blue economy startups to life by connecting investors, founders, and resource providers in a way that provides education, matchmaking, and mentorship to these companies to help them to grow, scale their companies, and to build their businesses, which are developing the tech that are solving big challenges out in the ocean. I just wanted to bring to your attention two programs that we're doing November 9th with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute in Portland, Maine. We're having our second semi-annual Blue Venture Investment Summit, where we've got some of the major investors in blue technology companies. I know there was a question in one of the panels I was in, is there a mutual fund that invests in blue tech? The answer is not yet, but there's lots of venture capital firms coming into blue tech. And so you'll see some of them there, November 9th in Portland. And then our big event is the Blue Innovation Symposium that we hold each year in Newport, Rhode Island. This year, February 26th through the 29th, where you'll see a good cross-section of all the industry that are here. And speaking of everyone who's here, coincidentally, we have two Blue Venture Forum board members I'd like to introduce. Jeff Smith from Saab, and Justin Manley from Just Innovation. Thanks.
Thank you, Toby. So as I mentioned, this is the Blue Policy Roundtable, and this session is sponsored by the Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod. So if you want to wave at Joni over there, she has a table out front. You can go and find out what programs they have. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Mark Reel, who is the Climate Resiliency Coordinator for the town of Plymouth, and he is going to be facilitating this session.
Very good. Thank you, Michelle. So all of you know that policy really drives a lot of what we do every day, and so this is a really important conversation that we're about to have between legislators and people in the innovation sector. And so it's going to be really interesting because there's some really different work that's happening between legislation versus innovation. So I think what we'll first do is maybe just go down the very long line of folks we have here and have introductions. And at the same time, legislators, if you want to speak to some of the legislation that you have filed or are co-sponsoring, please feel free.
Good afternoon. My name is Julian Sear. I represent the Cape and Island Senate District, so the district that that's right up against Senator Moran's Upper Cape and Plymouth district. I've been serving in the Massachusetts Senate for 7 years. Have sat on a number of committees related to environment. I currently chair the Public Health Committee. Of course, health is quite intersected with our oceans and with our changing climate. I've done a lot of work related to ocean acidification, led a commission on that with Representative Dylan Fernandez. Lots of work on offshore wind, and lots of work related to aquaculture. Prior to joining the Senate, I worked for the Department of Public Health and got pretty involved when we had an outbreak of Vibrio parahemolyticus, which folks in Plymouth and Duxbury should remember in the 2012s, 13s, 14s was a big challenge. So got a lot of background here. I'm very honored to be invited to join you and cross over the bridge.
Bless you. Thank you so much. I'm Matt Muratori. I am the state representative for the 1st Plymouth District. And like Senator Sear, I was on the Oceans Advisory Commission a few years ago as a commissioner, and then the Ocean Acidification Commission that Senator Sear actually chaired. And there was one bill that we've all kind of sponsored, and that was H793, which is an act to overcome coastal environmental acidification nutrient pollutions. So that's a bill that we're very proud of coming out of that commission. And it's going through the process now in the Senate and the House side, and we hope to get a lot of support for that and hopefully get it out of session this year.
Thank Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kathy Lenatra. I represent the 12th Plymouth District, which is 6 towns, including Plymouth, part of Plymouth, which I share with my colleagues to my right and left. I have been very fortunate to partnership with Susan Moran, Senator Moran, and the New England Aquarium on several bills. One is an act relative to a future blue economy, and that has already been heard at a hearing, and we're hoping that will move forward. And I'm sure I don't want to take them all because I know the senator will probably mention a few too. But it has been a pleasure to be here all day, and again, grateful to the New England Aquarium.
Thank you, Kathy. Senator Sue Moran, very privileged to represent 4 towns on each side of the Cape Cod Canal. I am absolutely so grateful to the forum and the folks who put this together because this is the center of innovation. You know, we look at right in Cordage Park. I know you'll be touring some robotic, really cool ocean-related research. Get to see a peek into that. Woods Hole Oceanographic, right down the street from my Falmouth office. The concept of bringing everyone together in a room where people can talk about their work, talk about resources, talk about research to be done is something that the whole delegation, both the Cape side with Senator Sear and the Plymouth side, we've been excited about in terms of where is the best opportunity to put funding when we look at workforce shortages, when we look at being sure the food from our ocean is healthy for everyone, looking at innovative ideas with tracking systems and what is healthy and needs more work in terms of the animals that live in the ocean. So thank you all for being here and looking forward to the conversation.
Hi, Judith Underwood, CEO of Blue Institute Labs. We work with climate tech and blue tech startups. Right now, we continue working with them virtually. We have about 24 startups in this particular group, and we are working on creating our innovation center. It's a location the Navy used during World War II on Boston Harbor in the city of Chelsea, and it's not far at all from Plymouth or the Cape and Islands. And we have a sister nonprofit, Blue Institute, that also works with startups. We have an accelerator program. We've graduated 30 startups, 3 cohorts during COVID, and that's actually based in Harwich on Cape Cod. So, yeah.
Thanks, Judith. Toby Stapleton again, and director of the Blue Venture Forum. The one thing that I might not have mentioned in that intro is part of our mission is to educate investors who are interested in coming into Blue about what Blue actually means in terms of markets and valuations and things like that. So it's very much core to what we do. Look forward to discussing that.
Thank you. I'll take that silent pass. Hi, everyone. Stacey Messier from CIC Innovation Campuses. We are essentially flexible workspace, and we are the nation's premier soft landing destination, particularly for offshore wind companies. And so I'm really excited to be here on this panel today. We represent a passion for innovation, and our mission is to change the world through innovation. So I'm thrilled to represent our clients and our community, and really excited to talk through what opportunities we have together.
Thanks. We apparently did a great job of putting all the legislators on one side of the table and all the non-legislators on the other, so we'll just have to see how that goes.
We only have one mic.
Yes, we innovators know what to do here, right? So thanks. I'm Justin Manley. I've got many hats I've worn in this space for a long time. I'm primarily here on behalf of Alpha Impact Investment Managers. We're an impact fund out of Silicon Valley, and I'm the venture partner there for ocean tech, blue tech, whatever we decide to call the stuff we're talking about here today. I'm also on the board or advisory board of half a dozen different ocean tech startups. So I'm coming from the investor and the entrepreneur perspective today.
Very good. Thank you, Justin.
I think, maybe we'll start on that end this time and kind of go down this way, but would you folks, the four folks on that end, speak to some of the work you're doing around maybe advocacy in terms of trying to change some regulation or statute around fostering blue economy growth? You have four amazing legislators here that are focused on the blue economy, and I think it's a great opportunity for you all to be able to express some of those thoughts.
Since I've got the mic, I'll just sort of say that from an investor perspective, we look at policy as sort of an externality and sort of leave it to our investees to be engaging policy. From the startup perspective, I think the one thing I can offer here is it's important that we have bodies like CIC, Blue Institute, Blue Venture Forum, because a startup company doesn't have time, they don't have bandwidth, they certainly don't have lobbyists or money, and so I think it's important that we have these community institutions that would work on behalf of the groups I represent, because as individual investors or entrepreneurs, we can't do it on our own for various sort of structural reasons. So I'll hand it off to folks who can.
Excellent, thank you. Let's see. There's a few different facets here in terms of how CIC plugs into that question in particular. One is we regularly partner with our economic development partners within all of the cities and states that we reside in. So CIC is in 8 cities around the world. We're in Boston, Cambridge, and Providence from a New England perspective. And things like the question that I asked during our opening remarks session during lunch today around the MOU. So a lot of what CIC really stands for is being that community catalyst to enable the innovation ecosystem. And when it comes to the blue economy, in the state of Rhode Island, we've aligned ourselves with our state strategic priorities around blue economy, life sciences. But particularly for the blue economy, one of the things that we continue to try and house within our walls is the opportunity to build that community, right? It's blue sprint teams for anybody that was a part of those discussions last year, trying to bring the states, the academic entities, independent industry, as well as our regulators together to have these conversations about how do we get to the point of actually collaborating? Because I can tell you from the standpoint of representing the voices we hear from our clients every day, our international folks in particular are constantly asking the question, wait, so it's one country, but there's many states and y'all don't talk to each other. So how does this work? So that is very much what we are excited to continue to enable.
Yeah, and kind of a segue from that, one of the things that we saw, we started to see 8 years ago, is investors start to look at blue technology companies for investment. And that was driven by a number of things, but not the least of which is that there were some significant exits, acquisitions that took place that started to get investors interested. And then on top of that, markets started to diversify, and so there was a lot more interest from founders to start blue tech companies and investors to invest, especially clean tech investors who looked at where blue tech was today compared to where clean was 10 years ago, and they saw a lot of similarities. What also happened during that time was economic development officials across the United States started to look that had coastal communities, including the Great Lakes, including Vermont, since Green Sea is here, started to look at how do they develop their blue economy ecosystem outside of just tourism, historic things like tourism and fisheries and beyond. And through EDA funding, largely in the United States, you started to see these communities. Cape and Plymouth collaborated on a blue economy project, the New England Aquarium, Mississippi, Gulfport, Mississippi, Seattle, Washington, and beyond. And what that has done is start to galvanize these communities. So in New England, we have one of the densest and most diverse blue tech ecosystems on the planet. We're the least organized. So you've got Maine, we're doing a program in Maine on November 9th. Connecticut, Mass, and Rhode Island tend not to work together. The EDA funding that we went after, as we're based in Rhode Island, we're based in an incubator in Rhode Island, and I helped last year to write part of the Build Back Better Regional Challenge proposal that went into the EDA to get funding. But it was one of a bunch of blue proposals. The point is that Plymouth as a location actually has a lot to bring to the table in terms of the blue economy. Its proximity to Boston. The number one problem blue tech companies face today is workforce. And so being close to Boston is not inconsequential. And then on top of that, you have an ecosystem of companies that are here. So with that, I'll pass it to Judith.
Oh, no, I want their mic. No. I first have to say, I too am an elected official. I'm a water wastewater commissioner in my town, and I don't make policy, so this is really interesting. I just make sure it gets carried out properly. As far as startups, so we've been working on this idea of creating a Blue Innovation Center, and what that means is it's a place where the startups can have office space, but they can also get in the water. Not just the startups, though. It's a place for industry to have offices and for them to interact with the startups. It's also a place for government agencies like the Navy, like the Coast Guard, like coastal zone management, the fisheries, to interact with the startups and for the startups to kind of see what kind of challenges they're having and solve them. It's also a place for students, which is really important, right? You get young kids coming through, meeting these startups, meeting these folks from industry, government, and from the universities, right? Exposure. And one thing I will say for Plymouth, because I've always been a proponent of Plymouth, is there's one word, it's TRAIN. Get some money for the train to go to Boston, and then you have a reverse commute for innovators. It would, think about it. The thing that drives me crazy about blue policy, I'll try to be polite, in Massachusetts and in New England, or what one of my co-founders branded as Blue England, think about that, right? What a great concept, right? Is that we don't work together, as Toby said. And we really should, because I know the Europeans would really like to see a strong, cohesive, interactive blue economy here in New England, because they all want to come here. I don't know if you know that. And they don't think about Plymouth or Cape Cod or Newport being far away from Boston. To them, it's like all the same, Boston with a big B ecosystem. Right? They don't think about us in these small segments. So I'd say to the policymakers, awesome legislation you guys have put together in the last few years. Like, you have ramped this up so amazing. And just try to do a long picture, a wider picture as much as possible. But thank you for all the work you're doing, because, yeah.
That's hugely helpful, as is all of the prior comments, because we look at it as really, I guess, two big picture items. One is, how do we get rid of stumbling blocks legislatively? And second, how do we work incentives so that they fit with what the folks who are actually the inventors, the doers, actually need? And that's through these kinds of conversations. Kathy mentioned the legislation. We look at pipeline, for example. So trying to incentivize, whether it's for small business, education, just be sure that you all have the pipeline of workforce that you need. That also, of course, touches something that we know is an incredible crisis with respect to housing. It touches certainly wastewater. So you certainly have all those big ticket items, but that's, it's all the more important that when the innovators and inventors work together, there's an economy of scale, so that we don't have a redundancy, so that we're able, maybe it's an earmark, maybe you're working with a community on an idea. These are things that come out of these conversations. The legislation that we put forth in great stead comes from community ideas. So thank you for that, and on to Kathy.
Thank you.
Well, you don't.
Oh, good.
It's,
There we go. Go ahead.
okay. So something that Stacy had mentioned was the MOU that was drafted and released on the kind of a regional focus on wind, off the coast wind. So maybe for the legislators, in terms of what you've been working on your own legislation and what you've sponsored, what have you been doing, maybe focused on working with neighboring legislators in other states in the area or different levels of government, whether it's locally or federally, on some of these issues? Have you begun to have, some of those in-depth conversations? And I'm sure you have, so.
Sure. We've done a lot in this area, including 2 bills that were actually passed last session. We came early in the session. We had a little dispute with the prior governor, who had vetoed a bill at the end of the last session. So we came back in 2021. In 21, we passed the roadmap bill, which puts Massachusetts on a roadmap to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And then by the end of the session in 2022, we did the Drive Act, which is all about furthering offshore wind procurements, expediting and clarifying the process by which we go about that, widening the stakeholders who are there, also requiring utilities to proactively upgrade grid and grid modernization work. And there's much conversation happening this session, notwithstanding the bifurcation of the Joint Committee on Telecommunications, Utility, and Energy, on which I sit, but lots of conversation about how do we further accelerate the transition to offshore wind. What's been interesting when you look at offshore wind and what's happened, so the Cape and Islands District has been the primary host of most of these projects. These are south of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. Vineyard Wind is up and soon to be running. The first tower is fully assembled. You can see it off of Nantucket. It gave me so much joy to see that. Dylan Fernandez and I were reposting gleefully, notwithstanding the real history we've had, right, of the effort to first kill the Cape Wind project, and then also, some modest efforts against Vineyard Wind. What's been interesting as you look at the subsequent projects that are coming online, the Massachusetts projects, Commonwealth Wind, and they changed their name too many times. What's the other one? The Shell project, and then some of the Connecticut projects that are landing. South Coast Wind, thank you, sorry. I appreciate that. What's really interesting is how Vineyard Wind 1, although it was a very difficult project, broadly we were able to execute it with lots of support from islanders on Martha's Vineyard. The O&M facility for Vineyard Wind is located in Vineyard Haven. The Conservation Commission in Edgartown put up a little bit of a fight. There was sort of some lawsuit out of stakeholders in Nantucket, but broadly, landing at the Cape at Covell Beach went quite well from a community perspective. What's really fascinating, a little alarming, right, is now with these subsequent landing projects, landing of cables, the opposition that we're now seeing. Some of this may actually be where the beaches are, right? Covell's Beach is much more of a middle-class beach, and some of the beaches that we're talking about have constituencies that are a little different than that. But it's quite intriguing, and I think it's forcing those of us on the TUE committee and others to think about, all right, how the heck do we get to the level of offshore wind that we need? How do we do that within the existing permitting structure? And so both Representative Roy and Senator Barrett are talking about this and about the need to figure out how do we really get there. The other challenging piece, and I'm sure you'll hear this from stakeholders, who have far more expertise in offshore wind, it's just a heck of a lot more expensive to build these projects. And where Vineyard Wind, we are the first in the nation. Now, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Virginia are moving forward with projects themselves. So there's a tremendous competition for the materials. Several of the projects need to be essentially rebid because the cost and what they came in on are so much more, both from inflation and the cost of steel. There's real supply chain issues. So we're at a real inflection point. And so it's very exciting to have Vineyard Wind and Cape Codders and Islanders. I think most of us, notwithstanding a few awful NIMBYs, are brimming with pride that we are, hosting the first offshore wind facility in the country, right? If we don't figure this out, we're not going to have a future on Cape Cod and on the islands. related to rising seas and a changing climate. But a lot of dynamic things happening in this space.
Can I just add one thing to that, unless Matt? So just to, the other side of that, in one of the towns that I represent is Falmouth, but I also for 6 years was chair of the Board of Selectmen, also deputy speaker of the county government. And the initial outreach for any kind of innovative project is incredibly sensitive. It's incredibly important. You can't do it too repetitively, too many different ways. I know with respect to Falmouth's experience, the thought was that questions hadn't been answered, you know, and it's really about the local government's responsibility to their residents, and that's just sort of a ponderous kind of process. So what Senator Sear sort of mentioned about it, we now at least have one project out and running, and it's important for people to see, you know, it's like planning a wedding, or, you know, boy, that wasn't so bad, or that issue wasn't as huge as I thought it would be, or, you know, we're not talking about weddings, Julian, that was just an example. But anyway, I just wanted to add that municipal side to what you were saying.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to, I think the Senator said it very well, I think, is that we maybe as a state we were a little late to the party, I think, but we've really caught up pretty quickly. And we're doing a lot in the state and with other states, as the Senator said as well. So, and even in this town too, you know, the stuff we're working with on the with the Plymouth Economic Foundation. I'm proud to be a member with Stephen Cole and Amy Naples on that, and we talk a lot about this stuff over the last, you know, couple of years. So, prior to that, we just never were. So, it's becoming big, and I just want to follow up on one thing that was said over here before too about the workforce. I think that's an area that we really need to kind of concentrate on to help all you folks, and that's what we're really behind on. I think that's something we need to kind of focus on.
Very good. I think, you know, something I'm curious to know from you folks is if you were to have the opportunity to make one change today with a wave of a wand, is there something, whether it be a policy or a program or a regulation change, that would impact your work, or you would see impacting or furthering along the blue economy, and especially in a time when we are facing climate change and there's a real need for a rapid response? Maybe talk about something you see as being critical to make a change and make a difference.
So I had asked this to the Lieutenant Governor. Well, I hadn't asked. I said it's not really a question. I want to just put the idea in the back of your head. But since you guys are first to the table, so for startups, when you work in the blue space, and when I say blue, that includes climate, and I'd like everybody to think that blue economy, blue tech, and climate tech are really all in the same big circle, right? There can be little differences, but almost everything, I think you guys would agree with me, that gets done in blue tech affects the climate, right? The startups struggle financially because to work in salt water in particular, it's very dangerous, number one. It's very costly, and it takes a lot longer for you to get your return on investment. And when you put hardware and software together in the water, that makes it even that much harder. So I'd said to the Lieutenant Governor, could you think about somehow figuring out a fund to get startups from outside of Massachusetts or inside of Massachusetts? But I know a lot of startups that would like to come here and be here for 5 to 10 years, or maybe their entire lives, right, and grow their companies here. But they need that seed funding. You know, if you think about large companies, the Commonwealth gives them tax incentives, right? But a startup's not going to be able to access a tax incentive for many, many years. So how can we essentially give scholarships for climate fellows, climate innovation fellows, maybe that's what they could be called, and maybe that would go through smoothly. I don't know, but there needs to be, I think, some kind of fund in that space, similar, and I know they're starting to work on it, similar to what happened in the biotech space. But again, by and large, the blue tech space, it's not as sophisticated in the same way that biotech is. So it's very mixed.
I want to riff on that really quickly and sort of say yes, but so as an investor, startups getting government money to relocate is a horrible idea, right? Because you don't want a startup being led around by this non-dilutive, it's not a market forcing indicator, right? So you always want, when you talk to your founders, you're like, why are you making these decisions? I'm like, well, the government gave me money. It's usually not exciting to investors. However, a variant of this that could be very exciting is if whatever sponsor program we're talking about, what is really, really missing is the market aggregating effect and voice of a customer for things like a pilot program. So we've been talking a lot about wind, okay? So in wind, all these people build these little robots and they do this monitoring and they want to look for the whales, right? So there's this issue. Everyone thinks, okay, we're going to build robots to find the whales and that's going to solve a really, really important offshore wind. You talk to the regulatory side of that, you talk to the big industry side of that, everyone agrees, but nobody knows what to do. There's no best practice, there's no communication between the regulators, the developers, the buyers, the sellers. So if you had pilot programs, so if there was funding that sort of said, and you compete for it, and this isn't like an SBIR, this isn't like early innovation, this is like, if you write the right proposal, we'll give you money to come play with your toys in our water and show how they work. Those kind of opportunities are incredibly powerful, even for small companies. Get paid to show off your product in front of your customer, right? That's a great reason to do something, right? And it's very similar building on your idea, right? So however we execute this, showing market impact and showing it market demand in real world, real water out that way is a big deal.
And that's a win-win as far as a lot of investors I know will say, well, what kind of skin in the game does Massachusetts have? How can we really kind of build on that? I know Senator Sear and I will oftentimes put our opportunities together, bigger bang for the buck, and I just as far as whether it's a pipeline issue or anything else, I appreciate you putting that together. So.
And sort of building off the senator's comments, I think one of the things that would also help, this is a regional opportunity, but for Massachusetts, I think having a front door, companies, we've discussed it on this side of the panel, where companies don't have the bandwidth to look for office space, or so they'll work with a CIC or contact an industry association like MTS or someone to ask, well, where should we locate? If there was a front door for companies to contact to find out what are the resources in Massachusetts, because it's not intuitive. If you're in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon or the University of Pittsburgh working on a robotics application and realize that this could port, figuratively speaking, into the maritime environment, it's not intuitive to come to New England, never mind Massachusetts, even though we've got world-class institutions like HUI and the Naval Undersea Warfare Center here. So having that, economic development, someone, whether it's here in Plymouth or at the state, the Economic Development Office, that can answer those questions about the assets, the SBIR match, the START grant funds through a group like Mass Ventures and so on, could be incredibly powerful to pull companies in, because it's not necessarily that they're being incentivized through money. It's by the fact that their customers and the resources to build their technology and the workforce to build the technology are here.
Great ideas. Great. Go ahead.
I'm going to tack on. This is just a building session, people. Here we are. We're doing it. The one takeaway I had from going to American Clean Power Offshore Wind earlier this month, and even in this discussion today, is that access and awareness is probably our biggest challenge. In Rhode Island, we have innovation matching grants. We have STEM matching grants. But if you don't know where to go, if you don't know what to Google, as an entrepreneur, it's really difficult to find out. So, you know, CIC has something every Thursday called Venture Cafe. We often will have conversation corners with our economic development partners, our commerce department, for example, sitting down and making people aware of the benefits of, say, getting an MBE certification or finding out what does an innovation matching grant mean to me. The other piece of that is connecting to accelerators and incubators. We've got RIHub, we have See Ahead, we've got all of these amazing entities, but still in the conversations that I have with both enterprises as well as solo entrepreneurs and up is just learning, wait, there is money out there for me, how do I get this? So just trying to think about how might we increase access and awareness to these opportunities. And that also connects to your workforce development piece of it too. I always think about when I was a kid in the 80s, Earth Day, right? And all of the stuff that went around Earth Day. What is that for the blue economy right now? How do we get our kids excited and involved? There's a lot of great stuff happening in higher education. UMass Amherst has an amazing offshore wind master's program, for example. Mass Maritime has like a facilities management opportunity. But again, this is higher ed, that's master's level. What's the undergraduate? What's the high school equivalent to these things?
I have a program for that. We'll talk later.
Okay. So it's funny that you touched on that. The Senator and I have a bill that deals exactly with that. It's to create the Blue Economy Education Fund to provide high schools with funding to expand educational development, workforce training, and job placement. So
Excellent.
it's in the works.
Good, good, good.
I would just add, there's a real opportunity coming up with the reprocurement of these offshore wind projects. They're going to have to put a whole host of community benefits right out there, and it's probably going to have to be more substantial, significantly more expensive than it was before. So if you've got an idea or a project or something, the various offshore wind developers are going to be bidding. That's a real opportunity. The other piece I sort of think about, right, if I could wave a magic wand, I feel like our blue economy represents both sort of one of the oldest sectors. I mean, a sector that's been around for, you know, literally hundreds and hundreds of years, and also one of the newest here. And I think there's real challenges with part of the more traditional part of when we think about the blue economy, when we think about, you know, people who rely on fishing to make a life. You know, because of the climate change, the climate crisis, we are seeing changes in our fisheries that are going to very adversely affect, you know, our various fleets. There's population shift with species. You've seen this, of course, happen with lobster, right? There is not a lobster fishery anymore south of the Cape or in Long Island Sound in a time where there was. Ocean acidification is also part of that. So how do we kind of make the link between our sort of more traditional ways that we've made livings on the water and then, you know, the sort of newer, sexier things that are kind of coming on now? And there's a bit of a disconnect there. And I think anytime we can tie that in, either through training, the location of these O&M facilities when it comes to offshore wind or others, there's a real sweet spot there, and I think we should be thinking about that from an economic development perspective and a job training perspective.
And one last little piece to that, from a preservation, and you know, you talk about the acidification, like those sorts of, you know, being shepherds of the resource, equally important.
Thank you. Yeah, I would add that, I mean, really, this is what this conference is about. It's looking at those traditional sectors in the blue economy that exist and have existed in Plymouth and throughout Massachusetts coastlines, and then looking at the innovative ways that those industries can continue to operate with climate change impacts, alongside new innovative technologies. And Plymouth Harbor is really an awesome opportunity for all of the different sectors. So we really have been focusing here on putting a spotlight on Plymouth Harbor. So with all of you, you know, we've taken up a lot of time and we've built in some time for audience questions. So are there any folks in the audience? Perfect, excellent. Michelle or Mike, do you wanna?
I'm gonna take one of your
Yeah, that'd be good.
mics.
We're limited on our mics down here.
Thank you.
I always have questions, I'm sorry. So Michelle Vaughn, Director of Admissions at Cape Cod Community College, but also a selectman in my town in Kingston, next town over. I love you guys. You all do an amazing job. working with us. You know, grant opportunities being what it is, I think grant writing is really difficult for a lot of us municipalities and trying to figure out what grants are most important to get, but even how do I write it? You know, what is out there? And I think a lot of times they think about it, but where's the time to get it, and how do I write this, and where's the time to get these grant opportunities? Because I know there's a lot of grant opportunities out there, but they don't have the time to write them or even how to get started writing them. And I love to see something out there on how to write a grant for the blue economy, or writing these grants, or having help with that, because I think it really is important that there is money out there, but it's really how do I get started with it, you know? And being that I work at the community college, we have a lot of certificates or grant opportunities for certificates, and making sure that students know that you don't have to go on to get a bachelor's degree to work in that field. You can have a certificate, you can have an associate's degree and be able to get a job. And I think just getting more out there and understanding that the workforce is there, and you don't have to have the highest level of degree to be out in the work field and have a career, not a job.
That's why, Sheila, that's why I think it's so important for these certificate programs. You know, you can stack your certificates, but you hit the nail on the head. Just a suggestion, I have, 6 communities, 3 of them have combined their resources to hire a grant writer. So that's some of the things municipalities are doing. They're sharing a grant writer. But I agree, there should be a class on that, because it's not easy.
Yeah, and I can tell you one of the things the town of Plymouth does is they actually have a grant writer now that came about, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe. And anytime we see grant opportunities, we forward them right to them. So they have, sometimes they know about them, sometimes they don't. But legislators, that's what we do. We make sure everyone at least knows about the grants. Anything we can help with, we can. But over the last several years, some of these grants have been really streamlined to make it a little bit easier for towns as well, because they do understand there's a lot of other smaller communities, particularly in the western part of the state, that just don't have the resources to do that. So,
Any other questions? Yep. Make my way out through the crowd.
Thank you. Carl Lander with Green CIQ. Tagging on to what Senator Sears said a minute ago about the sort of the legacy aspect of the blue economy. As I've traveled the globe, really dealing with some of the things that Green CIQ is dealing with, we've seen that, or at least I've seen that the blue economy is very focused on the new, the exciting, and not doing a good job of looking back at legacy type issues. Specifically, my area with Green CIQ is ships biofouling. 3,500-year-old problem. If you were here last year, you heard my CEO describe it as being the second oldest industry in the world. Behind, the joke, that's what the oldest one is. So we're dealing with legacy rules, legacy regulations that new technology is now being able to address. And for example, we can't clean ships in Massachusetts. So we're cleaning ships the rest of the world, can't do it here. And the rules were written with great intent. But we need to see advancement, and for startups particularly, as they're looking at new novel solutions that may be great in one neighborhood, but not necessarily the other one because of decisions made last week, 10 years ago, whatever the case may be. And so in the blue economy, as we heard earlier, it's one ocean. The decisions of, for one port and another port, they all play together. And so my question is how can smaller companies that aren't yet into the lobbyist level, be able to influence some of these decisions and look holistically at things and not assume that just because we've been doing it all along, we've gotten it right?
So I think that's a great question. There is some bills that have been filed related to the oldest industry. So if you want to talk about this later, we can talk about those. But I think first and foremost, we want to know that you're here, right? Especially if you're doing activities, in my district or in Sue's district, or even reach out to us, even as simple as an email, being like, "Hey, this is going on. We want you to be aware of that." I also just think we can do. I just think that I do see a real disconnect, right? Because the more traditional marine economies and blue economy work really have been left behind for quite some time, right? For decades, really this is an industry that has seen a series of collapses, right? From first it was a salt industry, then it was a whaling industry, then it was a fishing industry, largely that's collapsed, collapsed in the 70s and 80s. Of course, we have a very extensive scallop fishery out of New Bedford. A lot of really interesting innovation coming out of small boat fisheries out of Chatham and the Cape Fishermen's Alliance and others really trying to figure out how do we think differently about the fish that we're catching? How do we bring that into market in different ways? But if we don't know you exist, remember, legislators only know what we know. And you don't necessarily have to have some sort of fancy lobbyist to come knock on our door. Even simply an email, but like, hey, I'm doing this work that's based in Harwich. I want you to know about it. Would love if you could swing by and take a look, or just want this on your radar. Don't be intimidated by that. Don't feel like you need to have a highly paid Sherpa guide to come to our door. That's not how any of us operate. How most of us operate. And I think we want to really hear from you.
I want to jump in on that. Come to your innovation centers. Come to Chelsea. Come to CIC. Go to Innovate Newport. Part of what we do is host roundtables. CIC last year, we had the opportunity to host Susan Collins, Boston president of the Federal Reserve. So we had a Fed president come to hear from our clients that represented a range of different sizes of industry, different scales of enterprise, in order for her to do a listening tour to really understand what's happening on the ground. We often end up facilitating conversations like what you're talking about, where if you have an idea and you're like, I need to get the right legislators in the room and I want them to hear from people that represent these companies or levels of industry, and let's have a facilitated discussion. We can help you do that. That's part of why we exist. That's part of what we want to do to foster the conversation, because we're clearly in the middle and sort of like this sidebar liaison. But any way that the innovation centers can help you facilitate that conversation, we're happy to be that and happy to help you knock on the door.
Yeah, and I'd encourage you, so the basic message here, we've talked a lot about New England doesn't work well with each other, we don't, yet we're strong. There are different organizations. One of the important things is to sort of get out of our own way and start showing up at these cross-sectoral conversations and forums, right? So, Blue Venture Forum and what we offer in February, there's an agenda there and there's a theme there. And if hull cleaning, which leads to climate change, shipping is the 3% of all global emissions come from shipping, right? So we can build, there are resources, some in this room and others, we can start to build these stories. And so my show up message is also to policymakers, right, as well, investors, so that, and then what I would suggest is then you can start layering these, right? So we're talking about sort of New England or a Massachusetts specific issue. We can layer those into higher level organizations. So in my volunteer life, I run this group called the Marine Technology Society. We just got a $4 million grant from NOAA to spend 4 years working on what we call the Ocean Enterprise Initiative, which is essentially blue tech, ocean tech, whatever you want to call it. And it's all about building out these sub-pillars of the blue economy. And while NOAA is paying for it, it's intended to support all government agencies. So start here, take the story. I'm making this up. I'm not saying we have to do this, but by way of an example, bring your topic to the meeting that we run locally, get local legislators involved, and then we can escalate the ones that need to be escalated. But we do have to collaborate and we have to show up, and we do often have to get our heads out of our own sort of problem set and think about collaborating on other problems. It's not easy, right? But it is how we grow industries.
And it's super important. The other side of that I want to recognize is small business, right? So as a small business person, you're doing the bookkeeping, you're doing the tax planning, you're doing the grant writing, you often, there aren't enough hours in the day. So joining a trade organization, signing up, even if you can just read the newsletters, that'll sort of, give you an idea about whether it's a, common issue. Use your municipalities. Oftentimes, lobstering in Plymouth, it's a huge, hugely important industry that, of course, Plymouth wants to support. Those are, that's the ideal, but if you just can't get there, do it in baby steps. Do what you can, because you're your ideas, your questions are really important. If you could have them answered, your life would be easier, and chances are there are more folks in your industry that have the same concerns.
One more,
I think we have time for one more quick one,
if we have one
or not.
or not.
Also, you can email us. We take all those ideas. That's how we come up with legislation. We're a resource. We can, if there's an issue that you haven't been able to get an answer on, we can help you find the person who might have the answer. We can expedite something. A lot of the times it's been taking too long. So, really, we're on the state website. Contact us, as I think we've all said, directly.
All right, thank you so much. And can we get a round of applause for our panelists?